Grandmother, how does it feel to manage a $4.2 million estate? My fork clattered against the china plate. The room tilted sideways for just a moment, and I wondered if my blood pressure medication needed adjusting. But no, the dizziness wasn't medical. It was shock, pure and simple. I beg your pardon, sweetheart? My name is Eleanor Bradford, and at 74 years old, I thought I'd heard everything. I've survived a world war as a child, buried a husband, raised 3 children, and spent 40 years as a legal secretary watching human nature at its worst. But sitting at my daughter-in-law's mahogany dining table on what should have been a simple family dinner, I realized I hadn't seen anything yet. My grandson Thomas, 19 years old, home from Yale for the holidays, sat across from me with the earnest confusion of youth. Your estate, grandmother. The one grandfather Edmund left you. Mother and father have always said it's why you live so comfortably without worrying about expenses. I looked at my daughter-in-law, Victoria. The woman had gone the color of curdled milk. Her hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass, and she took a long drink that had nothing to do with enjoying a good Merlot. My son Jonathan cleared his throat. 3 times in rapid succession, his tell since he was 6 years old, and broke the neighbor's window with a baseball. Thomas. Honey, I said slowly, choosing each word with the precision I'd learned drafting legal documents. I don't have an estate. I have a modest savings account, my Social Security, and the small pension from Maxwell and Associates where I worked for 4 decades. That's all. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It warms this old heart to know where my words travel. Thomas's perfectly groomed eyebrows, so like his father's, drew together in confusion. But that's impossible. When I was applying to universities, Father showed me the trust documents. He said you insisted on paying for my education because you believed in investing in family. He said the monthly disbursements from your estate covered my tuition, books, everything. The room seemed to shrink. Victoria was now examining her plate as if the roasted chicken contained the answers to the universe. Jonathan had developed a sudden fascination with the wallpaper pattern. Jonathan. My voice came out sharper than I'd intended. But 30 years of managing difficult attorneys had taught me when to use the tone that meant business. Would you care to explain to your son, and to me, what he's talking about? Mother, this isn't the time. This is exactly the time. I set down my napkin with deliberate care. Thomas, would you please show me these trust documents your father gave you? The boy looked between his parents, finally understanding that he'd stumbled into something bigger than a simple misunderstanding. With the instinct of someone who'd learned early to trust his grandmother over his parents' silences, he pulled out his phone. I have photos of them in my cloud storage. Father said I should keep digital copies in case the financial aid office ever needed verification. Financial aid office. My stomach dropped like a stone down a well. Thomas swiped through his phone and turned the screen toward me. What I saw made my 40 years of legal training kick in with crystal clarity. Bank statements from Bradford Family Trust Management, showing my name as the primary beneficiary. Monthly statements going back 3 years. Distributions for educational expenses, property maintenance, medical costs, all of it beautifully formatted. All of it completely fabricated. Thomas, darling, I said, keeping my voice gentle because the boy was innocent in whatever scheme his parents had concocted. These documents are forgeries. I've never had an account with Bradford Family Trust Management because no such institution exists. Eleanor, please, Victoria started. Be quiet, Victoria. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Thomas, I need you to think very carefully. Did you submit copies of these documents to Yale's financial aid office? His face told me everything before his words did. Yes, Father said it was standard procedure, that they needed to verify all family assets to determine my aid package. And you received need-based financial aid? Yes, ma'am. About 40% of my tuition is covered by grants because the forms showed our family's financial situation after accounting for the supposed trust. I closed my eyes. Financial aid fraud, federal crime. My grandson had unknowingly committed a felony because his parents had lied to him. When I opened my eyes, Jonathan had finally found the courage, or perhaps the stupidity, to speak. Mother, we can explain. It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. How long? I asked simply. I don't understand. How long have you been telling people I have money I don't have? How long have you been creating false documents in my name? How long? Victoria's tears started then. Not delicate, feminine tears, but the desperate kind that come when your entire carefully constructed world is about to collapse around you. 3 years, she whispered. It started when Thomas was applying to colleges. The financial aid calculations were so complicated, and we couldn't afford the schools he wanted to attend. Jonathan thought if we just adjusted the numbers slightly. Adjusted the numbers. I let the words hang in the air like spoiled meat. You mean you committed fraud? We never took money that wasn't owed to us, Jonathan protested weakly. We just reallocated the aid calculations to be more favorable, using my name, my identity, creating false financial documents that made it appear I have millions of dollars. Thomas had gone very still, his food forgotten. Father, what did you do? Thomas, son, you have to understand. What did you do? I'd never heard such steel in my grandson's voice. Perhaps Yale was teaching him something valuable after all. Jonathan slumped in his chair. We needed help with the tuition. Victoria's mother couldn't contribute anymore after her medical bills, and my salary as an architect barely covers our mortgage and living expenses. But Thomas is brilliant. He deserved the best education. So we created documentation showing that your grandmother had means to help. It made you eligible for more aid. By lying to the federal government, Thomas said flatly. By committing fraud. We were protecting you, Victoria said desperately. We wanted you to have opportunities we never had. By making me complicit in a crime I didn't know I was committing? The boy was sharp. He'd definitely inherited his grandmother's analytical mind. Thomas, I said gently, this isn't your fault. You're a victim here too. But I signed the forms. I submitted the documents, under false pretenses, believing them to be legitimate. That's a very different thing in the eyes of the law. Jonathan's head snapped up. You wouldn't report this. Mother, please. Think about what it would do to Thomas's future, to our family. I'm thinking about exactly that, I said quietly. I'm thinking about how you've not only committed federal fraud, but you've endangered your son's entire academic career. Yale could expel him for this. He could face criminal charges. All because you were too proud to admit you couldn't afford an Ivy League education. That's not fair. Fair? For the first time, I raised my voice. You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what's fair. Fair is when my sister Beatrice called me last month, embarrassed and apologetic, asking if I could loan her $400 for her prescription medications. $400. She's 79 years old, living on Social Security alone, and she hesitated for 3 days before calling me because she didn't want to be a burden. I turned to look at Jonathan. Did you tell Beatrice about my supposed millions? His silence was answer enough. You did, didn't you? You told the entire family that dear old Eleanor is sitting on a fortune. And so Beatrice, who helped raise you when your father and I were both working 2 jobs, felt ashamed to ask her wealthy sister for help with medication she needs to stay alive. Victoria was crying harder now. Thomas looked like he might be sick. Who else did you tell? I demanded. Who else in our family thinks I'm secretly wealthy? Most of them, Jonathan admitted. Uncle Richard, Aunt Margaret, the cousins. After we showed them the trust documents, word spread. It seemed easier than constantly explaining why we couldn't help more with family expenses. Easier. I stood up, my 74-year-old knees protesting but my spine straight as steel. You found it easier to destroy my reputation, commit federal fraud, and manipulate your own son than to simply live within your means. Mother, please sit down. We can work this out. Oh, we're going to work this out, Jonathan. But not the way you're hoping. I pulled out my cell phone, a modern necessity I'd learned to use quite well, thank you very much, and dialed a number I'd hoped never to use. Who are you calling? Victoria asked in a panic. Someone who can help us navigate this disaster you've created. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered. Whitmore and Associates, how may I direct your call? This is Eleanor Bradford. I need to speak with Margaret Whitmore immediately. It's urgent. Margaret had been my boss for the last 15 years of my career before retirement. More importantly, she was one of the finest criminal defense attorneys in the state. And she owed me more favors than she could count after I'd saved her practice 3 times with my meticulous record-keeping. Eleanor? Margaret's voice came through warm but curious. It's good to hear from you. What's wrong? I need your help with a family matter involving federal fraud, identity theft, and falsified financial aid documents. The pause that followed spoke volumes. I'll clear my schedule. Can you be at my office in an hour? I can, and Margaret? I'm bringing my grandson. He's going to need separate representation. After I hung up, I looked at Thomas. Get your coat. We're going to see a lawyer. Grandmother, You did nothing wrong, Thomas. But you're going to need someone protecting your interests, separate from your parents because their interests are no longer aligned with yours. Mother, you can't do this to us, Jonathan pleaded. I'm not doing anything to you. You did this to yourselves. I picked up my purse and turned to face my son. For 3 years, you've been lying to everyone who matters. To your son, to our family, to federal authorities. You've damaged relationships, committed crimes, and made me an unwitting participant in your fraud. Did you really think there would be no consequences? We were desperate, Victoria sobbed. Desperation is not an excuse for criminality. It's an explanation, not a justification. I'd heard those words from Margaret 1,000 times, and now I understood their weight. Thomas stood up, his face pale but determined. I'll get my coat. As we walked to the door, Jonathan made one last attempt. Mother, if you do this, we could go to prison. Our lives will be destroyed. I turned back to look at him. This man I'd raised, who I'd sacrificed for, who I'd loved unconditionally for 47 years. You destroyed them yourself, Jonathan. I'm just making sure the truth comes out before more people get hurt. You always were self-righteous, Victoria spat, her desperation turning to anger. No, Victoria. I'm just someone who believes in consequences. And the consequence of fraud is justice. Thomas and I drove to Margaret's office in silence. The boy was processing, and I let him. Sometimes the worst moments require quiet contemplation. Finally, as we pulled into the parking structure, he spoke. Grandmother, am I going to be expelled from Yale? I don't know, sweetheart. But we're going to fight like hell to make sure you're not punished for your parents' crimes. That's why we're getting you separate representation. Do you really think Father could go to prison? I parked the car and turned to face him. Thomas, your father committed multiple federal crimes using my identity. Yes, I think he could face serious prison time, and as much as it breaks my heart, he needs to face the consequences of his choices. Even though he's your son? Especially because he's my son. I raised him to know better, to be better. The fact that he chose this path despite everything I taught him makes it worse, not better. Margaret met us in her office, a sharp woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. After listening to the full story, which took over an hour with all the details, she leaned back in her leather chair. Eleanor, this is worse than you think. My heart sank. How? The documents Thomas showed you? They're not amateur hour. They're sophisticated forgeries. Someone with serious technical expertise created those, and that means this probably goes deeper than just financial aid fraud. What do you mean? Margaret turned her computer screen toward us. I ran the name Bradford Family Trust Management through our databases. It's a shell company that's been flagged by the FBI for potential involvement in multiple fraud schemes. If your son is connected to this organization, he's not just facing financial aid fraud. He's potentially part of a larger criminal enterprise. Thomas went white. How is that possible? Your father would have needed to pay someone to create those documents. That someone is likely connected to organized fraud operations. The FBI has been investigating these groups for years. They specialize in creating false documentation for people willing to pay. How much would something like this cost? I asked. Anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 for a complete package with ongoing support and updated statements. My mind reeled. Jonathan doesn't have that kind of money. Then he borrowed it, which means there's a paper trail, and that trail is going to lead investigators right to him once we report this. Once we report it? Thomas's voice cracked. Can't we just fix it quietly? Margaret's expression softened with sympathy. Thomas, your grandmother's identity has been used to commit federal crimes. Every day we wait to report this makes her potentially complicit. We need to get ahead of this before someone else discovers it and assumes Eleanor was involved. What will happen to my parents? That depends on several factors. How cooperative they are, whether they've committed other crimes we don't know about yet, how much money is involved. But Thomas, I need you to understand something. Your parents put you in an impossible position. They made you unknowingly commit fraud. That's not just wrong, it's a form of abuse. The word seemed to hit Thomas like a physical blow. Abuse? Making your child complicit in criminal activity without their knowledge? Yes, that's abuse. You trusted your parents to guide you correctly, and they betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. I reached over and took Thomas's hand. Sweetheart, none of this is your fault. But I should have questioned it. I should have asked to see real documents, talked to you directly about the money. I was just so excited about Yale that I didn't think critically. You were 16 when you applied, Margaret said firmly. A child trusting his parents' guidance. That's not a failure of critical thinking. That's normal developmental trust. Your parents exploited that trust. Over the next 3 hours, Margaret laid out our strategy. Thomas would retain separate counsel and cooperate fully with authorities. I would file a police report for identity theft and fraud. Jonathan and Victoria would be contacted by federal investigators and given the opportunity to cooperate. What are their chances if they cooperate? I asked quietly. Margaret didn't sugarcoat it. If they provide information about whoever created those documents and help the FBI with their larger investigation? Maybe reduced charges, possible probation for first offense. If they refuse to cooperate, years in federal prison. That night, back in my small apartment, the modest one-bedroom I'd lived in for 20 years, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Jonathan as a little boy, all gap-toothed smiles and endless questions. Where had I gone wrong? How had I raised a son who thought fraud was an acceptable solution to financial problems? Around midnight, my phone rang. Jonathan, Mother, please, we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you that won't be said through lawyers. I know where the documents came from. His voice was desperate, defeated. I know who made them, and I'm willing to tell the FBI everything. Please, can we meet? Just once? Against my better judgment, I agreed. The next morning, Jonathan came to my apartment alone. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Where's Victoria? I asked. Her parents' house. She can't face you. Cowardice seems to run in your marriage. He flinched but didn't argue. Mother, I need you to know I never meant for this to spiral so far out of control. How did it start? Jonathan sank onto my second-hand couch. 3.5 years ago, Victoria's mother got sick. Cancer. The medical bills were enormous, and we were already struggling. Victoria was having panic attacks about money. Then Thomas got accepted to Yale, and we knew we couldn't afford it even with financial aid. So, you decided to commit fraud. I decided to ask for help. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes. I came to you, remember? Asked if you could help with Thomas's education. I did remember. And I told you I didn't have that kind of money. You said you only had your pension and Social Security. But I looked into it, and I knew your pension was decent. I thought maybe you were just being cautious, keeping reserves. So I thought if I could just rearrange the numbers on the financial aid forms to show that you were helping, maybe we'd qualify for more aid. That's fraud, Jonathan. I know that now. But it started so small, just adjusting a few numbers. Then the financial aid office questioned our calculations and asked for documentation. I panicked and found someone online who could create the documents we needed. Who? A company called Heritage Financial Solutions. They advertise as estate planning consultants, but what they really do is create false documentation for people trying to game financial aid systems. I paid them $35,000. Where did you get $35,000? His silence told me everything. You took out a loan, didn't you? Using what as collateral? The house. I took out a home equity line of credit. My head dropped into my hands. Jonathan, you mortgaged your home to pay for fake documents so you could commit fraud. Victoria didn't know. I told her I'd figured out a way to handle it, but I never told her how much it cost or where the money came from. Does she know now? I told her last night. Good. I thought, but didn't say. They both should be devastated. Here's what I don't understand, I continued. Why did you tell the rest of the family about my supposed wealth? The financial aid fraud is one crime, but you created this elaborate lie that spread throughout our entire family. Jonathan rubbed his face. After the documents existed, people started asking questions. Why was Thomas going to Yale if we couldn't afford it? Uncle Richard assumed you must be helping. Instead of denying it, I just let him believe it. Then, Victoria started telling people about your generosity, and it became this whole thing. It became a convenient excuse for why you weren't helping other family members who needed it. Yes, he admitted quietly. Do you have any idea what you've done to my relationships? Beatrice needed help with medication and was too embarrassed to ask because she thought I was sitting on millions. Your cousin David asked me for advice about his mother's nursing home costs, then apologized for bothering me, saying he understood I probably had a lot of people asking for money. I never thought about it that way. No, you didn't. You thought about yourself, your pride, your desperation. You never once considered how your lies would affect anyone else. We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Jonathan spoke. What happens now? Now you hire a lawyer, not Margaret, someone who specializes in federal criminal defense. You cooperate fully with the FBI investigation into Heritage Financial Solutions. You provide every document, every email, every piece of evidence you have. And you pray that cooperation earns you some mercy. What about Thomas? Thomas has his own lawyer. He's going to Yale's administration tomorrow to explain the situation and request that his financial aid be recalculated based on accurate information. Margaret thinks the university will likely allow him to continue if he demonstrates he was an unwitting participant. Thank God. Don't thank God, Jonathan. Thomas is only going to survive this because he's 19 and can credibly claim he trusted his parents' guidance. If he were older, this would destroy him too. And Victoria and me? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. I honestly don't know. That depends on the prosecutor, the judge, and how much damage control you can do. But, Jonathan, even if you avoid prison, even if you somehow manage to keep your career and your home, you need to understand something. What? You've destroyed your relationship with your son. Thomas looks at you now and sees someone who made him complicit in crimes he didn't know he was committing. That betrayal runs deep. It's going to take years, maybe decades, for him to trust you again. If he ever does. Jonathan started crying then. Not the manipulative tears of someone trying to gain sympathy, but genuine grief for what he'd lost. I love him, Mother. I love Thomas more than anything. I believe you. But love isn't enough when you've betrayed someone's trust this fundamentally. You're going to have to prove your love through years of consistent, honest behavior. And even then, it might not be enough. After Jonathan left, I called Thomas at his hotel. How are you holding up? I don't know, Grandmother. I feel like my entire childhood was a lie. Not all of it. Your parents' fraud doesn't erase every good memory or genuine moment. How do I know what was genuine? I had no easy answer for that. You probably won't for a while. But Thomas, you're going to get through this. You're strong, you're smart, and you have integrity, which you clearly didn't learn from your father. He laughed weakly. I learned it from you. Then honor that by handling this situation with honesty and courage. Tomorrow, when you meet with Yale's administration, tell them everything. Don't minimize, don't excuse, don't try to protect your parents. Just tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may. I'm scared. Good. Fear means you understand the gravity of the situation. But don't let fear paralyze you. Let it motivate you to handle this correctly. The next few months were brutal. Thomas met with Yale's administration and presented all the evidence Margaret had helped him compile. The university launched a full investigation, and for 3 agonizing weeks, we didn't know if they would expel him or allow him to stay. In the end, they concluded Thomas had been a victim of parental manipulation. They recalculated his financial aid based on accurate information, which actually increased his need-based grants, since his family's true financial situation was far worse than the fraudulent forms had shown. Yale also connected Thomas with a therapist who specialized in family trauma and fraud victims. The FBI investigation into Heritage Financial Solutions moved quickly once Jonathan provided his evidence. 17 other families had used the same service to commit financial aid fraud, and the total amount of fraudulently obtained aid exceeded $6 million. The couple running Heritage Financial Solutions were arrested and charged with dozens of counts of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Jonathan and Victoria received plea deals in exchange for their testimony. Jonathan got 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and a $50,000 fine. Victoria got 2 years probation and 300 hours of community service. They also had to pay full restitution to Yale for the fraudulently obtained aid, about $80,000 over 3 years. Their house went into foreclosure when the home equity loan came due and they couldn't pay. Last I heard, they'd moved into a small apartment and were both working second jobs to make restitution payments. Thomas finished his sophomore year at Yale with a 3.9 GPA. We talk every week now, long conversations about everything from his political science coursework to how he's processing the betrayal by his parents. "Do you think I should forgive them?" he asked me once. "That's not for me to decide. Forgiveness is deeply personal." "Have you forgiven them?" I considered the question carefully. "I've forgiven them for being flawed humans who made terrible choices out of desperation. But I haven't forgotten what they did, and I don't trust them anymore. Maybe someday that will change. Maybe it won't." That's honest. Honesty is all we have now, sweetheart. It's the only way to rebuild. 6 months after the whole disaster began, I received a letter from Beatrice. She'd heard the full story from other family members and wanted me to know she never believed I was secretly wealthy. "I knew something was wrong when Jonathan told me about your millions," she wrote in her shaky handwriting. "The Eleanor I know would never live modestly while her sister struggled. You've always been generous with what you have, but you've never been someone to hide resources from family who needed them. I'm sorry I didn't call you directly to ask about it. I let my pride get in the way of our relationship." I called her immediately, and we cried together over the phone, 2 old ladies laughing and weeping about the absurdity of family drama and the preciousness of honest relationships. "You know what the worst part is?" Beatrice said between laughs. "I actually felt guilty for years thinking you had all that money, and I was so poor. Like somehow I'd failed at life because my baby sister was so much more successful. I felt guilty thinking you wouldn't ask me for help because you were too proud. We're a pair of fools, aren't we? The best kind of fools, the honest kind." Thomas came home for the summer and stayed with me in my small apartment. He slept on my pull-out couch and complained cheerfully about my ancient coffee maker and lack of cable television. It was wonderful. One evening, as we were making dinner together in my tiny kitchen, he said, "Grandmother, I've been thinking about what kind of lawyer I want to be." "Oh? I thought you were considering political science for government work." "I was. But now I'm thinking about criminal defense, specifically defending fraud victims who get caught up in their family members' schemes." I stopped chopping vegetables and looked at him. "Because of what happened to you?" "Because of what I learned. About how easy it is for good people to become complicit in crimes they don't understand. About how the legal system doesn't always distinguish between perpetrators and victims clearly. Someone needs to fight for people like me." I put down my knife and hugged him. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you." "You think so?" "I know so. Edmund always believed the purpose of law was to protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. That's exactly what you'd be doing." That summer, Thomas also visited his parents a few times. The conversations were difficult, painful, and necessary. He told me afterward that his mother cried through most of their meetings and his father seemed broken by guilt. "Do you think they've learned from this?" he asked me. I hope so. But Thomas, understand that it's not your job to rehabilitate your parents or forgive them on any timeline but your own. They're adults who made adult choices. They need to live with the consequences. Part of me still loves them. Love and trust are different things. You can love someone and still recognize they're not safe to be close to right now. Are you close to them anymore? I considered the question. No. I speak to your father occasionally, brief conversations about practical matters. But the relationship we had, the mother-son bond built on mutual respect and trust, that's gone. Maybe someday we'll build something new, but it won't be the same. That makes me sad. Me too, sweetheart, me too. Now, a year after that bombshell birthday dinner, I'm sitting in my small apartment writing this story. My life looks almost exactly as it did before. Same modest furniture, same careful budgeting, same simple pleasures. But everything feels different. I've learned that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than comfortable lies. I've learned that integrity isn't just about what you do, it's about having the courage to face consequences when you fail to live up to your own standards. Most importantly, I've learned that real wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts or trust funds. Real wealth is having people in your life who value honesty over comfort, who choose truth over convenience, who stand by you even when the truth is ugly and difficult. Thomas starts his junior year at Yale next month. He's declared his major in pre-law and joined a student organization that provides legal education to first-generation college students about financial aid fraud. He's turning his trauma into purpose, his pain into protection for others. That's the kind of inheritance I'm proud to have given him. Not money, but values. Not a trust fund, but trust itself. If you're watching this, remember that the temporary comfort of a lie is never worth the permanent damage to relationships built on trust. And if you've discovered family members lying about money, about you, about anything important, you're not alone. The truth is always worth fighting for, even when it costs you everything. Subscribe if this story spoke to you. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever discovered family secrets that changed everything? How did you handle it? Because the truth always comes out eventually, and when it does, you want to be standing on the side of integrity. Thanks for staying with me through this story. At 74, I've learned that the best inheritance isn't money. It's the courage to live honestly, no matter the cost. And that, my dears, is worth more than all the trust funds in the world.